I'm assuming you've heard of the Bohemian Grove, even if you know the gist of it, and you've seen the photos and the footage that Alex Jones shot in the year 2000 after he snuck inside. Let's go deep. I was obsessed with the Bohemian Grove for years, and I've done more research on it than most people. I even have some very rare pieces of physical evidence from inside that I'll show you. So let's get into it. The Bohemian Club was started in San Francisco in 1872 by artists, musicians, and writers as a place to party for those who supported Bohemianism, which had become quite trendy in the late 19th and early 20th century. The Bohemians celebrated hedonism and overindulgence and reveled in rebelling against the conservative conventions of the culture. Soon after its formation, businessmen and those with money joined the party, and they were called men of use by the original artistic founders who called themselves men of talent. The artists enjoyed having the wealthy newcomers help come and foot the bill for their increasingly elaborate parties. What originally began in San Francisco at their clubhouse soon took a more rural turn. By the early 1880s, the Bohemian Club was holding weekend campouts during the summer in the vast redwood forest around Sonoma County in California. A few years later, they began renting the location now known as the Bohemian Grove from the Sonoma Lumber Company and later purchased 160 acres of the forest, later buying more land, expanding their ownership to the current 2,700 acres, which is over 4 square miles. Most men's clubs meet in Masonic lodges or fancy country clubs, but because of its unique rural atmosphere, the Bohemian Grove soon became a favorite spot where wealthy men could relive their college days partying like there was no tomorrow. In the 1930s, the Bohemian Grove became a favorite spot for U.S. presidents as a sort of Camp David in the woods, and this is when word about the Grove began to spread and countermeasures were implemented to ensure its secrecy. Members and guests enter the campground with the strict understanding now that what goes on at the Bohemian Grove stays at the Bohemian Grove, and discussions, whether personal or business related, are all completely off the record. This is not just a campground. There are hundreds of structures inside, ranging from elaborate clubhouses and sleeping quarters to a massive industrial kitchen and large amphitheaters, all of which are maintained by a rather large staff, not to mention guarded by an expensive security force and local police. As you may imagine, maintaining such a luxurious facility is not cheap. In the 1990s, the initiation fee was $10,000, along with monthly dues. There's a 10 to 15 year waiting list for new applicants, and in order to even be considered for membership, 2 current non-related members have to sponsor a prospect who is then screened by a membership committee before being placed on the wait list. Since few men actually quit the club, most aspiring members have to literally wait until someone dies to then take their place. Many of the members are in their 60s and 70s, and a few of them pass away each year. The Bohemian Grove is registered with the IRS as a 501c7 social club, which makes them exempt from federal income tax and possibly state property tax as well. One of the requirements for 501c3 organizations is that their financial records have to be made available to the public for inspection if you know where to look, and of course I do, and their documents are quite interesting. The 2019 records show that the club took in over $10 million in revenue from membership fees and other sources. They paid out $3.5 million in salaries. The staff and other expenses were listed as $7 million, which went to pay for food, booze, insurance, electricity, building maintenance, and new construction, including $1 million for IT services alone, probably beefing up their security system. Their total assets are listed as $35 million. The first book dedicated to exposing the Bohemian Grove was published in 1974, titled The Bohemian Grove and Other Retreats, written by William Domhoff, a sociologist professor who taught at the University of California, Santa Cruz. He starts off the book explaining that upper-class retreats are of a major sociological relevance because they increase the social cohesiveness of America's rulers and provide private settings in which business and political problems can be discussed informally and off the record. Domhoff and a handful of other scholars who are familiar with the Grove and honest about it insist it's not just a vacation hideaway for the rich and powerful, but instead functions to facilitate the ruling class network and elitist ideologies which affect the entire world. The book also exposed the cremation of care ritual and starts off on the first page saying, quote, "You are one of 1,500 men gathered together from all over the country for the annual encampment of the rich and famous at the Bohemian Grove, and you are about to take part in a strange exchange ceremony that has marked every Bohemian Grove gathering since 1880. It goes on to include a full transcript and detailed description of the cremation of care, which was a historic revelation at the time, especially since this book was back in the 1970s, decades before the information age. Almost 10 years after William Domhoff's book came out, ABC News surprisingly aired a segment about the Bohemian Grove in 1981. Somebody somehow was able to get a copy of this report from their archives and post it on YouTube in 2006. And of course, I saved a copy of it.
Now a question. What have Herbert Hoover, Art Linkletter, Jack London, and Richard Nixon all had in common? Well, they've all been members of the exclusive all-male Bohemian Club in California, where every year at this time, the elite from around the country get together for 2.5 weeks of fun and games.
The segment went on to reveal that members and guests spend 2 weeks camped out in the secluded redwood forest and named Gerald Ford, Henry Kissinger, George H.W. Bush, Ronald Reagan, and Richard Nixon as members, along with executives at Standard Oil and Bank of America. Privacy is one of the Grove's most cherished virtues, the report continues. Members may not photograph, record, speak, or write about the activities at the retreat. Well, many public officials are Grove members. The press is a distinctly unwelcomed guest. It even showed a photograph of the cremation of care and included an interview with sociologist William Domhoff.
Well, I think it's a playground for the powerful. It's a place where wealthy men from all of the United States gather for 2 weeks to relive summer camp with this ceremony called the cremation of care that begins the 2-week encampment where the body of dull care, symbolizing woes and concerns, is burned on an altar in front of a big owl statue. When that ceremony ends, they all start to cheer and yell and hand each other a beer.
The senior ABC News editor must have been on vacation, or the Bohemian Grove became arrogant and didn't think that a major news network would betray the strict editorial control by Operation Mockingbird assets who usually prevent such stories from making it to the airwaves. But since this historic segment over 40 years ago, there hasn't been a single national news organization that has made a peep about the Bohemian Grove. Only alternative news sites and the local Sonoma County Press Democrat newspaper have ever even acknowledged it exists. And have you ever heard any brand name talk show host mention the Bohemian Grove once? Has anyone who claims to be fighting against the establishment or the deep state ever even uttered the words Bohemian Grove or posted any pictures on social media of the cremation of care? No, they're still too afraid to be called conspiracy theorists. Or worse, their donors and handlers don't want their cover blown and they don't want to bite the hand that feeds them. 8 years ago, in 2015, I wrote an entire book about the Bohemian Grove called The Bohemian Grove Facts and Fiction, separating the facts from the fiction, because there are some pretty wild rumors about the place that may or may not be true, but many of the so-called conspiracy theories are completely verifiable. So after this video, if you really want to go down the rabbit hole, order that book in paperback from Amazon.com and click the link in the description below. I first learned about it back in 2004 after finding Alex Jones footage of the cremation of care ritual on the old BitTorrent networks like LimeWire and BearShare in the days before YouTube. I didn't even know who Alex Jones was at the time. That was sort of my first introduction to him, and I didn't believe him at first, but after looking into the place and personally obtaining several copies of their internal annals, which are sort of like yearbooks for Bohemian Grove members, it became clear that Alex Jones was right. I had also gotten in touch with an employee who worked inside the Grove, who showed me exclusive photos and footage that he personally took. He had also obtained various items while working there that proved that he was who he said he was, including an official membership list. A staff of around several hundred people helped run the place during the summer encampment, working to cook food and keep up the grounds, most of them local high school kids from nearby towns who have no idea about the identities of the men that they're serving. Back in 2008, when Hillary Clinton was running for president, Bill Clinton was speaking at a campaign event when a heckler began shouting at him about the Bohemian Grove. There was a pretty big crowd and security couldn't immediately make it to the man to throw him out for his repeated interruptions, which were derailing Bill's speech, finally causing him to respond and saying this.
The Bohemian Club, as you say, the Bohemian Club? Yeah. That's where all those rich Republicans go up and stand naked against redwood trees, right? I've never been to the Bohemian Club, but you ought to go. It'd be good for you. Get some fresh air.
His comment was referring to the common practice of members just whipping it out and peeing almost anywhere as if they were teenagers again at summer camp. It's a fun thing for them to do, apparently, and is part of the Bohemian Grove culture. The practice is literally encouraged, and visitors have reported repeatedly seeing men everywhere around the club peeing on the side of trees and in some bushes instead of making their way to a bathroom. Bill Clinton was also right about it being primarily a Republican club. Most, but not all, of the members tend to be Republicans who have historically been more involved with big business than Democrats. And with the exception of Bill Clinton's surprising outburst about this Republican club, probably because he's still upset that they caught him with Monica Lewinsky and cast a cloud of shame over his presidency and his legacy, no Democrats have dared to publicly denounce the Bohemian Grove, afraid of backlash from their establishment colleagues in Washington. Like the Bilderberg Group, it appears that even mentioning the Bohemian Grove is off limits for most politicians. There's so much more and it gets so much weirder. And again, it's not just a vacation spot for the ruling class. It's a networking and consensus building organization and functions as an informal think tank for the deep state. And then there are the allegations of Paul Bonacci involving Hunter S. Thompson and all kinds of horrible things I don't even want to talk about that Paul Bonacci and State Senator John DeCamp say happened there in the 1980s. It'll make you sick, but if you think you can stomach them, or if you want to learn more about this mysterious meeting place for the ruling elite, then order my book, The Bohemian Grove, Facts and Fiction, in paperback from Amazon.com, or download the ebook from any of the major ebook stores. My books are a lot more in-depth and serious than my videos, which I have to tone down a bit for obvious reasons. So head on over to Amazon.com or click the link in the description below and check them out.